Hey, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me for another training breakdown. It's deload week, and that's a topic that seems to be very confusing to people. What is a deload week, and why would you even need to take one? Do you need to take one? So joining me today in the training session, familiar to the channel, Shauna and Megan. They're here. They got just dropped right into my deload week. They're not necessarily on a deload week, but they love to train with me, and I'm always thankful for them to join me on any given day. And you'll see today how they took some of the training prescription and made it more intense for them, whereas I was trying to take it a little bit easy so that I could start the process of recovering from my previous 6-week training build that was extremely intense and fairly gnarly. Now, do you need a deload week? Well, first, what is a deload week? A deload week is an opportunity to lower either training volume, training intensity, or both. It should come at a point when you find yourself at the end of being able to progress in the current training system that you're following. If you don't follow progressive overload, if you're not trying to lift a little bit more than the week before, if you're just doing random workouts or moving for the sake of moving, then there's a good chance that you don't need deloads in your training. You just keep training consistently, and there's nothing wrong with that. The only thing wrong with that would be if you're not seeing the results that you want and you're wondering why your movement practice isn't getting you anywhere, then we need to talk about how you can start to implement progressive overload into your training. And once you've done that and you start to implement it correctly, there will likely and most definitely become a time where you need to take a break or a deload. Now, some of my goals during a deload are to focus on lowering my RPE, rate of perceived exertion, make everything about the training week a little bit easier for myself, and focus really on getting back to the deepest, fullest range of motion I can on exercises. I train with full range of motion even on heavy training sets, but performing back squats at 315 to a full range of motion versus performing back squats at 225 to a full range of motion ends up looking different. There's no question about it. The more tension, mechanical tension you have in your body is smart and knows how to protect itself, and it knows how to limit end range when you have maximal tension on your spine, for example. So in a deload week, you might find that you can get into slightly deeper ranges of motion. And what I like about that is it helps me to get back to thinking about quality of movement, strengthening joints at end range, building some more resilience in there, and healing my body a bit after it might feel a little beat up from some of the intensity. And what comes with intensity, and as it gets higher and higher, is your ability to recover drops and drops and drops to the point where you cannot progress any further. So in a deload week, this is how I structured the training session. We began the whole training session with a 20-minute EMOM of full body work. The goal, every minute on the minute, perform a different exercise for 15 to 20 repetitions per exercise. The first exercise was a hip thrust on the hip thrust machine. Using some stability from a machine makes it easier to hit these contractions. I only had 25 pounds loaded onto the machine, which is, with the weight of the machine, I don't know, maybe 135 pounds, I'm not sure. It's very light. The second exercise was a pull. This was a ring row, making sure to get a big stretch at the bottom of each repetition and trying to pull the rings as far down the side as possible. The third exercise was a calf raise, a seated calf raise. Again, using something relatively light, making sure to get a full stretch at the bottom on every rep. And last but not least, sit-ups. Now I use GHD sit-ups for me, which is relatively easy, but it was much more intense for the ladies. But remember, they were trying to keep their intensity up in this particular week because they were not in need of a deload themselves. Now, I used a slant board for my ring rows, and this is something that I think is worth talking about. Why would I use a slant board to hold my feet into position? And why might you want to think about your foot position when you're doing a ring row? I think one of the issues that I see with people doing body rows is that they never get themselves into a stable position with their lower body. They're wiggling around, or their feet are sliding on the floor. There's something that is not allowing them to focus all of their energy on the upper body pull. Now, after my previous training cycle build, if I had to pick one part of my body that felt a little bit smoked and maybe I overdid it with, it was my shoulder. My shoulder that I've had historical problems with ever since my CrossFit days was I maybe overdid it a little bit. So during this deload week and really the weeks that follow, I was trying to limit how much intensity I was bringing onto the shoulder and just choosing exercises that put it into a really good position. So for the strength movements in this superset, we really focused on lower body exercises. The first being the knee over toe split squat, and the second being the Nordic hamstring curl or the prone hamstring curl. Now, a deload week does not mean that you have to go completely to nothing with your intensity. You can start a new training build, and you have now new movements that you're going to progress for the next 6 weeks. And in week number 1, you're aiming to only hit 7 out of 10 RPE, which means that you have weeks likely to build upon that in the way of load and reps. And so you're starting with something that's less intense than the prior week that you had just finished up another training progression. So the purpose of my deload week was to generally give my body a rest and a break because I had kind of pushed my intensity very high. I needed to chill out before I started my next training build, but I chose 2 exercises that I felt confident that I could push a little bit today, and most importantly, really explore that deep range of motion, particularly on the knee over toe split squat. The knee over toe split squat was a movement pattern I hadn't been doing in the previous cycle, so I hadn't used it in quite a while, which is a great way, if you're looking to deload, pick a movement that you haven't touched in weeks, maybe months, and so the first day of doing it, you're going to be kind of reacquainting with the exercise. Intensity is not going to come from loading super heavy. It might come from your brain trying to figure out what it's doing, but it's not going to be the same type of intensity that you experienced in previous weeks. Performing a knee over toe split squat, one where your knee translates really far forward and you get your hamstring to cover your calf, is a great way to work on not only quad strengthening, but hip flexor lengthening in the leg that is behind you. Having a little bit of a slant board or a little bit of a wedge underneath your heel is a great way for people that have tight ankles, maybe some mobility restrictions, to get into this position safely and be able to produce some force so they can really focus on the deep knee bend without being limited by their ankle mobility. Now, I chose to do hamstring curls on the machine, where the ladies were doing Nordics on the Nordic bench. The Nordic hamstring curl is a very intense exercise. It's a very challenging exercise, and as could be the lying hamstring curl. But with the lying hamstring curl on the machine, obviously you have a wide range of weights and loads to select from, whereas on the Nordic hamstring curl, in most cases people are doing body weight eccentrics, and that has a particular intensity to the loading for everybody. You can look at these 2 exercises and note that they're really working the same joint through a similar range of motion, except for the Nordic hamstring curl is a closed chain exercise where the foot is static and then the body is the weight and you're fulcruming at the knee. Whereas with the lying hamstring curl on the machine, the body is stable on the bench and the foot is moving through space, and the load is what you load onto the selectorized pin. Open versus closed chain exercises, which is better? We like to include both in training. They train slightly different stimulus, and so I think it's very advantageous to have a way to tackle all parts of the body similarly with an open and a closed chain exercise so that you get the benefits of both types of training. I think I'll give one note about the Nordic hamstring curl technique. When you're developing strength for this, it is really critical to overload the eccentric portion of the exercise as much as you can. This is probably where I see people making the biggest mistake. And it's not because they're not trying hard, it's because they're giving up too soon. And what I mean by that is as you're lowering down in the Nordic hamstring curl, we want to apply tension through the full range of motion. When you get to about 30 or 45 degrees, where your body angle relative to the floor, it becomes extremely hard to hold your body weight up. This is where you need to add some assistance in and continue to work on muscle tension in the hamstrings for that bottom half of the range of motion. The best way to do that is with outstretched arms on a bench or touching the floor ever so slightly, where you start to ease the tension off of your hamstrings by using your arms a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, but don't just fall down to the pad or the floor because you miss out on that bottom half of the range of motion where we want to be developing strength as well. So we started with a 20-minute EMOM. We did some strength work in the middle. Now we're going to finish with a 18 to 20-minute conditioning EMOM that was about breathing and doing a little bit of lower body strength work. The first station was going to be a sled push. The second station was going to be a bike. And the third station was going to be a row. And this was a pretty simple format. 40 seconds of work, 20 seconds of rest, move to the next station, rotate through. We went for 18 minutes. So a 20-minute start, roughly a 20-minute finisher, and a 10 to 15-minute strength section in the middle of training means this workout in entirety was about 50 to 55 minutes. That is a little bit less than a typical training day, 75 to 90-minute training day that I do. And so the volume of work was less. As you know, the intensity of the work was less. I discussed how I made some of those selections. And you can see that a lot of this was focused on range of motion, hitting positions in all these different parts of the body. And for me, taking a little bit of a break off of shoulder work, that was the area of my body that was feeling the most beat up from the prior session. I hope this helped you understand a little bit why deloading might be appropriate for you and in what circumstances it might not be appropriate for you. And when it comes to deloading and you have a training program set in front of you, what choices would you make inside of that set training program, from loading to reps to maybe positioning of the body, in order to let your body heal and feel better so that the next week that you have coming up or the weeks to come are able to focus again on progression. If you have any follow-up questions about deloading or about the way that we approach training today, drop them in the comments below and give us a like. We're going to be back with more of these in the future, so let me know what you want to see in the way of training breakdowns and concepts. And hopefully you learned a little bit more today about when and why you should deload or not. See you next time.